G. Edward Griffin will be next. Looking forward to a day when the Federal Reserve is no longer. The Federal Reserve is not federal and it has no reserves. It's a private banking cartel empowered by Congress to control the production of currency, expanding the money supply at will. With us now, G. Edward Griffin, author of the book with the very provocative title, The Creature from Jekyll Island, a book explaining where this monetary monster came from. Ed, it's always a pleasure. Welcome to Freedom Watch.
Well, thank you for inviting me back.
The story that you describe in this book, and I tell everybody that is watching us now who wants to know anything about the Fed to get this book and read it, is one shrouded in a word that hits you from the first page. Secrecy, secrecy, secrecy. Why was this monster conceived in secrecy, created in secrecy, started in secrecy, and now, even nearly 100 years later, operated in secrecy?
Well, the answer is very simple. They had something to hide. When the Federal Reserve System was passed into law, it was presented to the American people and to a large extent even to Congress as being some kind of a great humanitarian effort. There's supposed to be some agency of the federal government which was going to act in the best interest of the American people and all that sort of thing, when in reality, as you've already said in your introductory remarks, it's a cartel. It's no different than a banana cartel or an oil cartel happens to be a banking cartel, and they didn't want this fact to be known to the American people, and that would be obvious if you just looked at who created it. It was the people that assembled in secret on this Jekyll Island location, which is a real island off the coast of Georgia. They represented the largest financial institutions in the world. And they were creating an institution which supposedly was to control the big bad banks and, you know, defend the rights of the American people. Yeah. So if people had known who wrote the bill, they would have known that it was a scam.
I agree with everything you've said. I think we should audit the Fed and find out what they've been doing since 1913, and I think we should end the Fed. But it is an anomaly, a contradiction in this respect. Congress for 230 years has grabbed more power here, more power there, regulated more, taxed more, controlled more. Except when it comes to something like the Fed. Congress has basically said to the Fed, you take care of us, we'll let you establish the value of money. Why do you think Congress was willing to give to the Fed this incredibly powerful tool?
Well, you're quite right. It is a partnership between the government and this private cartel. And the reason the partnership survives and the reason Congress goes along with it, well, there are several reasons, I suppose. One is that many of these guys in Washington don't really understand it and don't particularly want to, because they know it's a live wire if they become too critical of the system, why they're going to be ousted from office, perhaps. But also because they know it's very convenient. You see, Congress can now raise their hands and vote in these tremendous amounts of money, billions or trillions of dollars for whatever. They don't care what it costs, right, for the wars around the world, health care, jobs, bailout, banks, whatever. They don't care. They vote for it. Why? Because they don't have to raise the money from taxes. If they had to get that money from taxes, they'd be voted out on their ears. But they can go to the Federal Reserve and they just create the money out of nothing. So that's why.
Doesn't anybody understand the immorality of creating cash out of nothing? That from 1776 to 1913, the value of the dollar went up about 8%, but from 1913 to 2010, the value of the dollar went down 92%? Isn't that kind of obvious what caused it?
It's obvious to those who know it, Judge, but you know, they don't teach that in school. I didn't learn it in school. I doubt if you did. They kind of keep this information hidden from the mainstream. So people don't know. That's the problem. And that's the reason, you know, we're doing our best to get the word out. Once people understand the basics, they'll figure it out. They'll know that this is a creature, and it has to be abolished. By the way, I don't think the Fed needs to be audited. I think it needs to be abolished. We don't need to audit the mafia. We know what it's doing. We don't need to audit the Federal Reserve. We know what it's doing. It's a gigantic fraud. It's legalized plunder of the American people.
Why waste the time on the audit? Edward Griffin, the book is The Monster from Jekyll Island. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Next, the plain truth about good judges who protect us from the tyranny of the majority. Do we still have a Constitution? This week on Freedom Watch, we have all examined the ways that the government has failed to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. We have looked at Congresses that have written laws in direct contradiction to the Constitution, like the Alien and Sedition Acts and the Patriot Act. We have seen presidents claim that their first job is to keep us safe, when we all know that the president's first job is to keep us free. If he keeps us safe but unfree, he is not doing his job. We've seen this week freedom of speech squeezed into free speech zones. We've seen privacy openly mocked by federal agents who could write their own search warrants, send drones to the sky to watch us, and even listen to us smooch in the back seat of a car. We've watched how war transforms society from one in which the government works for us to one in which the Fed's printing presses devalue our currency, the government asks us to trade liberty for safety, and we've established 900 permanent military installations around the world. And in the longest war we have ever fought in Afghanistan, we have 130,000 troops looking for 100 bad guys. We've watched as the government attacks grave economic problems that it has caused by too much of its own borrowing and spending, by forcing more borrowing and spending. And we've even seen new laws so long and so complex that the folks who've enacted them haven't had the time or the intellect to read them, and the folks who are charged with enforcing them don't understand them. Do we still have a Constitution? Once the government respected our natural rights to speech, to privacy, and to whatever commercial activities we wanted to engage in. Now, when we want to protect our freedom, we have to sue for it. This summer, 4 major lawsuits against the government were all won by the good guys as courageous federal judges stood up to big government. In New Orleans, Judge Martin Feldman prevented the feds from blocking all drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. He alone invalidated the Obama administration's political moratorium. This giant single-handedly prevented the president from killing 100,000 jobs. In Phoenix, Judge Susan Bolton stopped the state of Arizona from establishing its own foreign policy and arresting people on the basis of their appearance. She alone saved the freedom of thousands. In Richmond, Virginia, Judge Henry Hudson told the feds that Obamacare might actually be unconstitutional, since no Congress or president in history has ever tried to tell us what we have to buy. He gave hope for freedom from the federal government to millions. And in San Francisco, California, Judge Vaughn Walker told the state of California that your right to choose a marital partner does not require the permission of your neighbors or the voters or the government. He enforced the right which, after the right to life, is the greatest of our rights, the right to be left alone. Each of these judicial giants reminded us that if it were not for an independent judiciary, which is committed to the Constitution against big government, nothing would prevent a runaway majority from taking the liberty or the property of the minority. Government can't be trusted, and every once in a while, judges will stop the beast in its tracks. The beast can be the tyranny of the majority, a government that thinks it can write any law, regulate any behavior, tax any activity, a government that recognizes as its only self-acknowledged limitation whatever it can get away with. Do we still have a Constitution? Only if we fight tirelessly to keep it. Thanks for joining us. We're back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. and then later at 8 p.m. with a brand new show. Until then, from New York, defending freedom. So long, America.